Let's talk about wide receivers that you should start or sit heading into week 2 of the fantasy football season. I'm going to go through all 32 teams, 16 matchups in total, and you can actually check the time codes below or pause the screen if you want to go to a particular matchup. If you went 0-1 or 1-0, it's time to get another win in week number 2. Let's start with Thursday Night Football. My Commanders at the Green Bay Packers. What an absolute banger. Shout out to the Thursday Night Football people. This is the second largest over-under of the week. Packers are favored by 3.5. That makes sense. This defense looks very good with the addition of Micah Parsons. But an elite offense like the Washington Commanders, you just don't sit these guys, right? Last week, Packers were middle of the pack against wide receivers. Little bit of data to work off right now after week number 1. Now, shout out to my Debo people. I was begging y'all all offseason. I was wrong on a lot of things, but I was begging y'all all offseason, please draft Debo Samuel. He's so cheap in the 8th round. He fits this offense perfectly. He's exactly what Cliff Kingsbury needs, and you saw him deployed in some incredibly exciting ways his first game as a Washington Commander. You can see Debo Samuel here had 31 routes run out of 37, Terry McLaurin at 33, 10 targets and 1 carry. I think you could see him get even more carries over the course of, the next couple of weeks as well. But obviously he had that vintage rushing touchdown, the end around where, he kind of gets into the end zone. That's vintage Debo Samuel. Still had a really safe floor through the air as well, with 10 targets, 77 receiving yards in total. Now, there is no reason to freak out about Terry McLaurin. He was still out there for the majority of the snaps, ran the most routes of any wide receiver. He and Jaden Daniels might just need a little bit of time to get that chemistry back after the holdout hangover, if you will. Both of these guys are going straight into my lineups this week. Now, I recognize anything is possible, okay? But we're putting them into our lineup. Let's talk about the Packers because, my God, what an absolute mess the Green Bay Packers wide receiver room was in week number 1. It makes it incredibly difficult to tell you to start any of these names with any confidence. That's why all 3 of them are labeled a risky start, meaning 90% of you guys probably have a better option. Now, all cards on the table, one of these guys is probably going to have a good game. I just don't know how you're supposed to recognize which name it is. Matthew Golden did not dominate the way that we wanted him to in his first start. Now, to be fair, he was second on the team in snaps, second on the team in routes run, but he only had 2 targets. Now, here's what I will say about the Green Bay Packers, okay? Last week, they only had 23 total routes run for the receivers, bottom of the NFL, okay? They did not throw the ball much because they absolutely dominated the Lions, and they didn't need to throw the ball at all. Jordan Love had a very easy day. So that type of game script will not carry over every single game. They're going to have to be a more pass-focused team in future games. We could see that here on Thursday night, but Romeo Doubs right now looks like the most secure start, even though he only had 4 targets last week. So look, I would steer clear of this. You guys probably have better options, even though there's probably a good start here. All right, let's go to Sunday, the start of the 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time slate of games. Browns at the Ravens. This is the largest spread of the week, and it's heavily in favor of the Baltimore Ravens. So Vegas thinks, hey, the Ravens should absolutely dominate in this matchup. Now, here's what I will say. Zay Flowers was not a name that we were actively, aggressively targeting in fantasy football drafts. Well, last week, he made me look like an absolute idiot. He had 9 targets out of just 18 total passing attempts, a 50% target share, which is absolutely ridiculous. Now, I will say 28 fantasy points, 143 yards, a touchdown. What an absolute dominant performance from him. I will say we've seen this in the past. We have seen him put up major performances and then come back down to earth. So we need to be a little bit cautious with this, but I am going to go ahead and label him a must start. All I'm saying is don't anticipate a 28-point game every week. There might be some boom bust potential with him, but we will start him against the Browns. Now, as far as the Browns go, last week we saw a lot of usage both with Jerry Jeudy and with Cedric Tillman. Cedric Tillman was a name we were suggesting to stash all offseason, and it's great if you did. If not, maybe you picked him up off the waiver wire this week. Cedric Tillman and Jerry Jeudy both had the same amount of snaps, the same amount of routes run, and the same amount of targets. So they were both used very similarly as far as usage in this game. Of course, Cedric Tillman goes out there, he has less yards, but he scores the touchdown, so he ends up with more fantasy points. That's not sticky. That could change any single week. So Jerry Jeudy, Cedric Tillman, they both will be startable names. However, if you drafted Jerry Jeudy, there's a lot of weapons that they're using in that offense now, so definitely doesn't look like the best draft pick at this time. They're using Harold Fannin, Cedric Tillman, Dylan Sampson out of the backfield, David Njoku, so they're spreading the ball out a lot more this season. So I would be cautious. The good news is there should be beautiful garbage time for Jerry Jeudy and Cedric Tillman in this game, considering it's the largest spread of the week of the year so far in favor of the Ravens. So we should see plenty of come from behind targets for those wide receivers. All right, let's move to the Jaguars and the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, look, I know if you have Brian Thomas, week 1 was not exactly what you wanted to see. However, let me give you a little bit of glass half full type of mindset. Brian Thomas in a game where the Jags did not need to throw the ball at any point. They were dominating this game against the Panthers. He still came away with 7 targets and 8 total opportunities. Of course, they used him in the end around. He got that rushing touchdown. So do not fear with Brian Thomas. There are better games ahead, and this is one of those better games in my opinion. This is the largest over-under of the week, 49.5 points. So Vegas says the most fantasy points are going to come from this matchup this week. So we're putting Brian Thomas straight into our lineups, and even Travis Hunter, who came out there and played a majority of the snaps at receiver, 27 out of 33 routes run, and 8 targets, leading the team in target share. So do not be afraid to put Brian Thomas, Travis Hunter into your lineups. This should be a much more competitive game. The game script should be much more neutral. They will need to throw the ball more here in Cincinnati. Now, of course, on the opposite side of that coin, it was a weird week 1 with Cincinnati. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I thought that because the Bengals decided to play their starters for the majority of the preseason, each game they got out there, I thought, okay, they've fixed their early season woes. They figured out how to, start strong. They did not. It's still the Cincinnati Bengals, but the good news is every time we've seen the Joe Burrow Bengals start slow, they always get hot. And I think this is the matchup where they come out and they get hot. We're ranking Chase again as our wide receiver 1. T. Higgins is a top 20 play. Put these guys into your lineup with confidence. They could win you your week. By the way, I'm going hard after this matchup in my DFS lineups this week. I just set an all wide receiver lineup on FastDraft's Quick 6 Super Slam contest. Last week, by the way, I finished 8th. I won some shmoney with this lineup with London, Henry, Sutton, Irving, Nakua, and Bowers. We put a 1.75 bonus on Derrick Henry, so that really helped us win some money back. The week 2 contest just opened. Again, all you have to do is choose 6 non-quarterbacks, adjust your boosters accordingly, and then the highest scoring lineup will win the most amount of money. Download the FastDraft app, use my promo code LAND at signup. I'm going to match your deposit up to $50. That is 5 free Super Slam tourneys on me. And then when you finish your first contest, I'm going to send you my week 2 rankings completely free. All right, let's jump into the Giants at the Cowboys. Malik Neighbors, yes, it was ugly last week, but he is still by far the most dominant receiver on this team. He will dominate target share. Continue to trust him. Wan'Dale Robinson did get a little bit of usage there, but it's just such a low ceiling. I just think most of you have a much better option at this point. We're not that desperate into the fantasy season yet. Let's talk about the Cowboys. CeeDee Lamb could have had a 40 bomb last Thursday Night Football if he didn't have a bunch of those drops. I think he's going to be angry, ready to come back and just show exactly how talented he is. We are absolutely putting him into our lineups with high expectations. And as far as George Pickens goes, this is a much better matchup for him than what the Eagles were on last Thursday night. If you guys remember on this very video last week, we were very, very hesitant on George Pickens, telling you lower your expectations. The boundary corners in Philadelphia are legit. I'm not disrespecting the Giants at all here, but I do believe George Pickens has a much better matchup. He is a flexible name, and I did put him into some of my DFS lineups as well. So expect a better game for Pickens, at least 12 PPR points in my opinion. All right, let's jump to the Bears at the Lions, another divisional matchup. 47.5 point over under. That's really healthy. The Lions are favored by almost 5 points. DJ Moore, Rome Odunze. It was a little bit up and down on Monday Night Football, right? Rome Odunze got the touchdown. That's great. But without that touchdown, both Odunze and and DJ Moore would have finished with under 10 PPR points. So let's hope that this Ben Johnson offense, we just have to be a little bit patient and see these guys slowly kind of become a little bit more dominant as an offense. The good news is last week, the Lions defense looked like absolute ass. So let's hope that the Bears can take advantage of that here in week 2 when we get a barn burner. On the opposite side of the ball, look, I understand. If you're disappointed with the Detroit Lions, you're in good company. as was I. I was disappointed, okay? But the good news is this is a offense that has elite talent across the board, and they're at home. They're in Detroit. Look for them to get right. I think they're going to get their lick back on the NFL. I think they want to put up big points in this one. I am absolutely putting Jameson Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown straight into my lineups here in week number 2. Now, you can make the case, well, Jameson underperformed. He had the same amount of targets as Amon-Ra. He actually led the team in snaps, routes run amongst wide receivers, and he actually touched the ball more than Amon-Ra St. Brown did. So just calm down on Jameson Williams, Amon-Ra. These are not guys that you sell. These are guys that you buy low right now if people are panicking. I'm expecting a big game out of these Lions here at home. Let's jump to the Patriots at the Dolphins. Now, you'll notice on the graphic here, I don't have a clear must-start name on this team. I genuinely don't think I can identify a name that I'm going to say he has to be in your lineup. Let's start with the Patriots side of things, because a lot of you guys are probably wondering, okay, who's actually the wide receiver 1 here in New England? We're going to find out more as we go. Stephon Diggs is not going to play, just 40 out of 71 snaps every single week. He's going to be out there as he recovers from this injury more. He'll be out there on the field more consistently each and every week. So look, if you're disappointed with Stephon Diggs in week 1, I get it, but look at the glass half full. He only played 56% of the snaps and still was targeted 7 times. That is great news. He should be a more consistent guy over the course of the year, but still not someone I can tell you to start with confidence. He is a flexible name right now. And Kayshon Boutte, I think you can go out there and start Boutte. I mean, if you look at, carrying on from last year, his last 4 games, he's been a startable name. He's been a reliable guy getting you over 10 PPR points on average. Last week, he led the team in snaps, routes run, and targets with 8. Obviously, then he comes out there and he puts up, over 100 yards. He looked really good. This is a guy 103 yards last week. This is a guy that at one point was a 5-star recruit, considered a top 10 pick in the NFL draft, and maybe he's finally putting things together. Now, Douglas did get the touchdown, but I would be very hesitant to start him moving forward. He should definitely be on your bench because clearly he's number 3 at best in an offense that we can't trust wide receivers yet anyway. Pick up Boutte, stash him, and play him if you're in a desperate situation. Now, as far as the Dolphins go, I don't think there was a single team all last week that were more disappointing overall, not just on offense, but also on defense. Tua Tagovailoa looked lost. Somebody get that boy a map. He didn't know where his receivers were. He was getting sacked left and right, getting pressured left and right. He looked absolutely bamboozled. Tyreek Hill was on the sideline, getting absolutely pissed off, upset. He looks like he's about to be out of Miami at some point. It looks like Mike McDaniel's going to lose his job. We were not drafting any Dolphins wide receivers this offseason, and this was why, because the vibes were at an all-time low, and it doesn't look any better. Now, they faced the Patriots, who last week gave up a lot of points to fantasy wide receivers, so that is a glass half full, but this is the first time in a long time that we're going to come out here in week 2 and tell you, no, you don't have to start Tyreek Hill. No, you don't have to start Jalen Waddle. Guys last week who got 5 and 6 targets respectively on a terrible offense. There's not the explosive plays anymore. Tyreek with 8 fantasy points. Jalen Waddle with 7 fantasy points. Neither had over 50 receiving yards total, and they are spreading the ball out in this offense, right? We are seeing Devon Achane just as involved in the air as the wide receivers, which is what we saw last year as well. We're seeing a backup tight end, Tanner Connor, get multiple, 4 targets, just as much as Devon Achane. So they're spreading the ball out. It's disgusting. You can start these guys if you don't have a clear, better option. You can see my rankings, by the way. Any matchup, you will see my rankings, so it'll help you make decisions. But man, I don't have much confidence in the Miami Dolphins this week. All right, let's jump to the 49ers. Last week, one of our starts of the week, Ricky Pearsall, he comes out there versus the Seattle Seahawks, has over 100 yards. Now, the bad news is we don't know if Brock Purdy is going to play. He's currently questionable with a couple injuries. The good news is, even if Brock Purdy isn't out there, they have Mac Jones as their backup, which, by the way, Mac Jones was the guy that led Brian Thomas to being a league winner last year in Jacksonville. So regardless, we are going to start Ricky Pearsall with a ton of confidence. Juwan Jennings currently dealing with an injury. The good news is that the MRI came back clean. They're still going to do some CT scans, but it is a good report. It's just we don't know how healthy he'll be this week. So even if he does play, I'm probably not putting him out there. Kendrick Bourne joined this roster, so he's a name to monitor. But man, news is constantly changing. The Juwan Jennings news, trades. We just saw Tank Bigsby trade, cuts. News is constantly changing in the NFL, which means so are my rankings. The 2025 season pass is a must-have for your fantasy football season. It's a $34 one-time purchase. When you use my promo code LAND, that's about $2 per week. You're going to get my instant updated weekly rankings, rest of season rankings, meaning every time I hit submit on my rankings, you'll know exactly where I sit with the latest news. You get unlimited access to the all the tools on the site, like the trade calculator, as well as some start, sit, and trade question vouchers to come ask me some questions on our live streams. Now, let's go to the opposite side of the ball with the New Orleans Saints. Chris Olave is the only name I'm going to even consider telling you guys to start, and that's purely because of targets, not because he's on a good offense. Now, Olave last week had 13 targets. 13 targets, that's a 31.7% target share. That's what you want to see if you're an Olave owner. He's not on a good offense, but man, if he can just get drowned in targets, then he'll be a reliable floor play with some upside each and every week. And I think that's what you have with Olave here in week number 2. All right, let's talk Bills at Jets. It's a 45.5 point over under. It's the second largest spread of the week. The Bills are heavily favored. Man, I'll tell you what, as someone who drafted Keon Coleman in the 10th round of the Flock League, I was very excited to see him out there week 1 with the Buffalo Bills. Reports this offseason were that Coleman was going to be the number 1 target in this offense, and that's what he was on Sunday Night Football. He played 75 out of 85 snaps. He ran the most routes of any wide receiver. And as you can see, he had 11 total targets. I mean, we're talking about a guy in his second season, first game of his second season, had a 25.6% target share with Josh Allen as his quarterback 1. Now, we need to lower expectations because last week was a perfect storm, right? Highest over under, highest amount of points of any game, the Ravens and the Bills. The Bills had to come back from behind the entire game. It was a perfect storm for Keon Coleman, okay? Now, not every game is going to be like that. For example, this game, they're 7-point favorites at New York. So there's a very good chance they're running the ball out in the 3rd and 4th quarter. So let's see it again from Keon Coleman. He's not a bad Hail Mary play. He's clearly the receiver I would prefer to start over Khalil Shakir at this point, higher upside. But I think we need to see some consistency before we trust him. Now, as far as the Jets go, the good news is Garrett Wilson, Justin Fields, they look like that connection from Ohio State is right there and they're thriving on it. Garrett Wilson got a ton of the targets last week. And the good news as well is we saw the Bills get torched through the air last week versus the Ravens. So that's a good sign for Garrett Wilson. He's a top 15 play for me this week. All right, let's go to the Seahawks at the Steelers. 40.5 point over under, one of the lowest over unders of the week. Steelers are favored by 2.5 points. Jackson Smith in Jigba. A lot of you guys were worried to draft him because, oh no, what happens with Sam Darnold? You know, there's no more Geno Smith. I don't know if I can trust Jackson Smith and Jigba. Our stance all offseason, we've taken some L's this video, we'll take some W's, is draft JSN when you can because he's going to dominate in PPR formats. And that's exactly what he did. Okay, he had 13 targets. 13 targets. I mean, they only threw the ball 22 times. I mean, over 50% target share in his first game with Sam Darnold. Cooper Kupp was a complete afterthought. He had 19.4 points, 9 catches, 124 yards. He is the alpha, and he will continue to be on this team. Now, as far as the Steelers go, we were very hesitant on DK Metcalf last week because we didn't like the matchup versus the New York Jets. However, this week, we're comfortable to go ahead and put him out there into our lineups. What is annoying is the Steelers do look like they are going to spread the ball out in this offense. I mean, last week you had names like Calvin Austin get work. We had Ben Skoranek score a touchdown. We had Jonnu Smith score a touchdown, right? So things were very spread out, but they were a high-powered offense. That's great to see under Aaron Rodgers. But we still did see DK Metcalf with 12.3 fantasy points. He had 7 targets. He just didn't get into the end zone. So that might be frustrating. But Calvin Austin, more of a name that you stash right now, but you know, there is a lot of hope for him moving forward. All right, let's look at the Rams at the Titans. 42.5 point over under. Very simple for the Rams. You start both Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams. Look, if you were upset about Devontae Adams last week, I get it, but there are so many signs to suggest he has a big year upcoming. For example, he still had 8 total targets out of 28 total passes. That's a great target share. Clearly, he's the number 2 in this offense, right behind Puka Nacua, a high-powered passing volume offense. Matthew Stafford is healthy. You put these guys into your lineup every single week that you can. On the Titans side of the ball, Calvin Ridley was a name that we were very low on last week. This week, I am still a little bit hesitant. Cam Ward, he looked okay. You saw flashes, but he's going to need some time to really get acclimated to the NFL. So I would be very hesitant with Calvin Ridley. If you have better options, look that way. If not, don't watch the game, put him in there, close your eyes, and hope he scores a touchdown. Okay, this is the start of the afternoon slate of games. We've got the Panthers at the Cardinals. So here's the good news for the Carolina Panthers. Well, more specifically, if you own Tetaroa McMillan, the good news is he was by far clearly the dominant wide receiver in this wide receiver room. He had 8 targets out of 30 total passes. That's a 26.7% target share. And I will be shocked if he's not seeing double-digit targets each and every week. And while he didn't have a touchdown, there was a couple big plays that got called back that he could have had an even bigger day. So he had a safe floor of 11.8 points. But man, I think we could have a huge blow-up game any week for Tetaroa McMillan, T-Mac as it is. But outside of that, there's nobody else that you're starting. There's nobody else that you can trust. He is the alpha on this team. Leave it be. And honestly, the same can be said with the Cardinals as well. They're spreading the ball out there in Arizona, but it looks like it's only Marvin Harrison and Trey McBride who are getting the vast majority of the work. Thank God we're seeing Marvin Harrison live up to his potential. I love to see that. You can put him into your lineup against the Panthers, who look like a terrible defense. At least that's what they looked like in week number 1. Okay, let's jump to the Broncos at the Colts. Courtland Sutton, one of our starts of the week last week, comes out, has a really good game despite the Broncos offense looking really lethargic. I would not be surprised if Sutton has even bigger games in the future. I don't trust any other Broncos wide receiver right now. Nobody has stepped up. Make sure you stash Pat Bryant, actually. But as far as the Colts go, here's the good news. If you drafted Michael Pittman, well, the guy that they paid, who would have thunk it? He's still a dominant receiver in this wide receiver room. He had 8 targets out of 29 total passes, a 27.5% target share. That's great news for our Michael Pittman owners. And honestly, the Colts didn't really need to throw the ball that much last week. They dominated that game pretty much from start to finish. This should be a much more competitive game. The bad news is it's a terrible matchup for Michael Pittman because he's going to have to face Patrick Surtain in one of the best secondaries in the entire NFL. Last week, the Broncos gave up the 3rd fewest points to fantasy wide receivers. So proceed with caution with these Colts wide receivers. You can flex them, but I wouldn't be bullish on them. And as far as Josh Downs goes, honestly, I was very disappointed in week 1 with his usage. He was an exclusive slot wide receiver. He wasn't out there in any 2 wide receiver sets, meaning he only played 36 out of 73 snaps. Not what you want to see for a Josh Downs breakout. He didn't even, hit the 50% mark in snaps. So if that is a trend that's going to continue, we're going to be very disappointed with Josh Downs this year. So I would not suggest for you to start him. All right, let's talk about the Eagles at the Chiefs. In my opinion, what happened last week with A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, we're going to throw it out. All right, A.J. Brown is a guy that you've seen win you leagues. He's won you weeks. He's been a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy for multiple years. We're not going to let just one game completely dictate the way we look at a wide receiver room. So A.J. Brown is going straight back into our lineups. We are going to trust him against the Chiefs, who got torched through the air last week versus the Chargers. I mean, Quentin Johnson had a day. Keenan Allen had a day. Ladd McConkey looked good. So maybe this Chiefs defense isn't as good as we once thought. We'll have to wait and see here. But I do expect the Eagles to have a really good game against the Chiefs. You can flex Devonta Smith. You certainly don't have to put him out there, but you can flex both of these guys. You can start A.J. Brown. Now, as far as the Chiefs go, I know it was very good for Hollywood Brown in week number 1. A lot of you guys would have picked him up off the waiver wire. In fact, he had 14 targets. He actually led the NFL in targets in week 1. Guys, look at me straight in the eyes. I want to tell you with 100% certainty that the Kansas City Chiefs plan, their game plan in an ideal scenario, is not to target Hollywood Brown 14 times, not to give him a 40% target share. But they were down that entire game versus the Chargers. They had to throw the ball, and ultimately Hollywood Brown was the only healthy receiver. They really didn't have a chance to plan with no Xavier Worthy. However, I can recognize clearly he's the wide receiver 1 right now in that offense, so you can put him out there, and we might see a similar game script, right? Where the Chiefs are down and they have to throw the ball. So he's a fine play. There are worse options, but outside of him, we're not considering anybody else. All right, let's jump to Sunday Night Football. We've got the Falcons at the Vikings. This is a 45.5 point over under, and the Vikings are favored by 4.5 points. Now, there's a lot of unknowns right now. For example, we don't know if Drake London is going to play or not. He injured his shoulder on Sunday, and he's currently being labeled day to day. So if he plays, he's a top 10 play for us. He dominated target share last week. You put him into your lineup. But if he does not play, that makes Darnell Mooney a much better start. With London in there, I would label Mooney a risky start, meaning 90% of you guys have a better option. But if Drake London is out, Darnell Mooney is going to have to be a focal point of this offense. He would be a flexible name. And even in like your DFS or desperation scenarios, you can look at Ray McLeod. Now, on the opposite side of the ball, I know things were a little bit messy for Justin Jefferson in his first game with JJ McCarthy. Thank God he got the touchdown. My concern is I don't know how much volume JJ McCarthy is going to give this offense. It looked like they wanted to run the ball a lot. And when they ran the ball versus Chicago, they were very successful as an offense. So my alarm bells, I'm going to be honest with you, like 3 to 4 out of 10 right now. I'm a little bit concerned. I want to see high volume for Justin Jefferson. Let's hope that happens here in week number 2. The good news is it's a decent matchup. The Falcons were top 5 in points allowed to wide receivers last week. And, you know, over the course of the season, we should see Jefferson and McCarthy get on the same page. So do not panic. Now, that takes us to the Monday Night Football doubleheader. Okay, there are 2 games. I don't know why the NFL keeps giving us these doubleheaders. I'm not asking for it. Are you asking for it? Okay, so this is very simple. You start Mike Evans, you start Emeka Egbuka. Very simple. Emeka Egbuka, one of our starts of the week last week, looks fantastic. We called him a Chris Godwin clone. He looks like the real deal. Put him into your lineups. He's a top 15 play for me here in week number 2. On the opposite side of the ball, do not freak out about Nico Collins and the Houston Texans. Things will be okay. They will be much better. We see this every year in fantasy football. Week 1 does not go the way people think it's going to go, and people start to freak out. So woo-saw, okay, a little bit with the Houston Texans. Nico Collins still a top 5 play for me here in week number 2. Last Monday Night Football game, the Chargers at the Raiders. You can start Ladd McConkey. I would be a little bit more hesitant to start Quentin Johnston. We saw a lot of boom-bust games from him last year, so I wouldn't be surprised if that happens again. Keenan Allen has a safe floor, so you can put him into your lineups as a flex, one of your last flex spots. Give him about 10 points in your lineup. And as far as the Raiders go, I am super excited to start Jacoby Myers. He's my wide receiver 25 this week. I have high expectations, especially if Bowers ends up not being able to play. But this is a matchup that both teams gave up top 10 points to wide receivers last week. We will chase this matchup here in week number 2. Guys, I appreciate you watching the video. Do me a favor, hit that like button to show some love. Subscribe if you like the content. And I'll see you guys in the next video. The running back start sit video is already on the channel, so you can go check that out. Nothing but love. That was a lot of talking. That was a lot of words, but I hope it was helpful, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Draft with me every night this week on the FastDraft app, where there are thousands of dollars to be won weekly. Getting started is easy. Download the FastDraft app. Use the promo code LAND at signup to get your deposit match up to $50. That's up to 10 free entries on us. And when you finish your first DFS contest, I'll send you my weekly rankings completely free. Check out the link in the pinned comment to start drafting today.